Yay, we're live. Hi, everybody. We're so excited for today. This is going to be so much fun, all about crafting your first ESG report. We're going to give everybody another minute or two to trickle in, but just wanted to kind of open this up. If I know some folks might be new to Livestorm, which is like the platform that we're using right now. But if everyone just wants to feel free to hop in to the chat, which is on the right-hand side, and just say where you're from, who you are, where you're from, and kind of what brings you here, why you're excited about ESG stuff. Because I know that there's a lot of folks on this call and people are coming in from all different places and coming at it from different perspectives, wanting to do different things. So this will be really helpful as we kind of craft the discussion and answer these questions to, make sure that we're kind of addressing some of the main reasons why you showed up today. So if you want to just kind of introduce yourself and why you're excited about ESG, that'd be great. Yay. Hi, everybody. Hi, Lino. Awesome. Great. Really excited. Yay. So yeah, feel free to just pop in there. Hi, Stacy. Yay. This is so fun. So many friendly faces that I miss. Awesome. Okay, keep it going. Keep it going while we kind of we'll get started as we go. So I'm just really excited to be doing this. This has been like a dream of mine for a while, both to do something collaborative with Amy and with Rebecca, who have both been like mentors and friends of mine. So we'll get into all that, and I'm really excited to introduce you to them. Before we do, just some housekeeping. My name is Rachel Klausner. Really excited to meet everyone. For those I haven't met, I am the founder and CEO of Millie. We're a social impact tech platform. So if you are and your company do donation matching and volunteering and grant making and ERG groups and things like that, anything that you would orchestrate around impact, we help folks with software. So really excited to be here. I see a lot of our customers on, which is awesome, and some folks that are new to the community, but we love doing these things that are helpful, and truly grateful to our customers. They were the ones that actually said to us, hey, we know nothing about ESG, and we really would love to learn where to get started with ESG and future ESG reports and things like that. And so that is why I kind of called Amy and called Rebecca and said, hey, can we do this? I think this would be really useful. So a huge shout out to actually Kelly at Drift for kind of getting this started, but really grateful for all of you guys for joining us today, because this is going to be a really fun one. So yeah, okay, let's dive in. So first, Amy Wendel, first of all, just so you know, geographically, we actually are, this is shocking because we're all virtual right now, but you're talking to 3 women all in the Boston area. So it's really fun. We actually get to meet up in person sometimes. But this is really fun to be bringing this live virtually. So Amy Wendel is the Senior Director and Global Head of Corporate Social Responsibility and ESG at GoTo, formerly LogMeIn. She's truly an entrepreneur, having started GoTo's CSR work back in 2014 while working as a marketing manager. And before they switched from LogMeIn to GoTo, she's built the program from the ground up and truly has established GoTo as a leading impact brand. That's how I found out about her, and she really stands out. She's also the founder and executive director of Project MEMA, which is a nonprofit working in education and healthy living in Moshi, Tanzania. And most notably for today's webinar, Amy has launched GoTo's ESG work and created their first report this last year. Having just gone through this entire process, I think she's going to be super helpful to everybody, really from start to finish, being hands-on with it and doing it from within. So I think that'll be a really great perspective, doing a deep dive, having just done this. And then Rebecca Leonard, we're so excited to have you. She's really the ultimate ESG expert. She's her kind of love of building meaningful impact really drove her 25-year career in this field. And she now runs a consulting practice called Purposeful Projects that focuses on helping craft ESG strategy and reports for kind of large Fortune 500 companies and others, but a lot of the big ones that you all know and love. She is also an executive advisor and teaching fellow at the Boston College Center for Corporate Citizenship. And she's had a lot of leadership roles before this. Prior to this, she led a lot of the CSR initiatives at TJX. So the TJ Maxx brands, I think is what it's formerly called, or TJX, but what we all know as TJ Maxx and Marshalls and all those fun brands. She led all that CSR work for a long, long time. So we're just really excited to have both of you on here. I feel like so lucky to just be able to get to ask the questions. And yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. So welcome, Rebecca. Welcome, Amy. Really excited to have you guys.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yay. I'm excited to kick this off. Okay, so there's lots of questions. We're going to do the first 40, 45 minutes with all these questions that I've kind of come up with. But folks, if you have questions, definitely pop those over into the questions box over there and we'll field those at the end because we know that there's a lot of question marks around this subject. So we want to make sure to answer all of yours. Okay. Great. So the first big one, which I think both of you can probably try to help me tackle, is how should a company decide whether or not to start with ESG and writing a report? Who wants to try that first? Rebecca, you want to kick us off?
Sure, I'll kick you off. So thanks, Rachel, first of all, for hosting this. It's excited and definitely, so many questions in this space, even from the largest and most sophisticated companies. So all of you that are out there that have lots of questions, so does everybody else. So don't feel bad at all. This space is about progress, not perfection always. So it's all good. Anyway, in terms of getting started, first of all, like with ESG itself, I don't think you can get, if you haven't, you probably are in some way organically engaged in ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues, if you're managing your company. So you probably are started, you just haven't formalized it and called it ESG. That said, thinking really intentionally about how you're managing your environmental and social impact and your governance is separate from reporting. That's just good business management. It helps you manage risk. It helps you find value creation and make sure that your business is sustainable, as well as, our world and our society are sustainable. So if you probably are started in ESG, and if you haven't really given it much thought on how to connect the dots, you probably should, because there's a lot of benefits that for your business. That said, in terms of reporting, the way to think about whether or not you should actually put out a report, aside from any regulatory or compliance requirements that you have, is, what are your stakeholders asking you? Are you in a supply chain? Are you already getting asked to put forth, your energy use, your emissions, the diversity of your workforce, or any other type of ESG issue? Are your employees asking questions? Are your potential employees asking questions? Do you need money? Are you going to investors or banks? Because they're going to ask you a lot of questions about these issues, increasingly so. Is there what are your peers? Are your peers reporting? Is there something in your industry that you really need to manage? And, in tech, it's an industry-wide issue to make sure that underrepresented talent that they're more inclusive to underrepresented talent in their workforce. And in, obviously in something like oil and gas, emissions is something that is an industry issue. There's a problem and they're part of it. That's the reality of it. So they need to answer that. And so once you understand that, you can say, am I already gathering a bunch of data? And think about, if you're gathering a bunch of data for all different stakeholders, maybe you do want to pull it together in a report, so that not just so that, you have a cohesive and streamlined way to get that data out, but then you're also leveraging it to tell your story to all these stakeholders, to engage your stakeholders. There's a lot of different benefits. Are you using it to create progress in your organization? It's a change management tool. I mean, we can talk later about all the benefits of it, but if you're getting asked for the information, leverage it and make it a value add for your organization.
Awesome. Amy, I'll kick this over to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, everything that Rebecca just said is what happened to GoTo. So I've been at GoTo for 8.5 years, was running CSR efforts, kind of grassroots on the side of my marketing role until it became a full-time role about 5 years ago. We transitioned from CSR to ESG a couple of years ago. So we've been doing a lot of work in the corporate responsibility space at GoTo. And just for reference, GoTo, we have 3,500 employees. We're global, 1.2 billion in revenue software. So that's our company profile. But we've been doing all these things for so many years. We just started getting all the questions, and the questions have been increasing in frequency and from so many different stakeholders. So we're getting asked about our ESG efforts from the private equity firm that owns us. We're getting the questions from our customers and prospective customers and RFPs and annual business reviews. We're of course getting asked by our employees and prospective employees. So for us, it was just like, okay, now's the time. We really need to pull all of the stuff that we've been doing already together in a report. And so we did our first report for 2021 that came out this year in July. And it was a Herculean effort, which involved, I want to say, like 24 or more, employees within my company. I think it came out to be about 60 pages or so, but we're really proud of it. So it was the time to do it. We couldn't wait any longer.
Yeah, wow. And piggybacking off of that, Amy, like what needed to be done before thinking about starting a report? Like what were those things before you actually like dove into it that you needed to be like set up or done?
Yeah. So when we kind of moved our strategy from corporate social responsibility, focusing more on the social side, a lot of philanthropy and giving, and then we moved to ESG. So we flipped that strategy about 2 years ago, and we started with a materiality assessment, and that's really the foundation in creating an ESG strategy for a company. And so what a materiality assessment is, and you can do this yourself, or even better if you work with a third party. We worked with consultants on this back in 2021, but essentially you survey your stakeholders on what is material and important to your company and how you can impact different areas. So there's so many different areas, that you could focus on, like dozens and dozens, right? Are you going to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion? Are you going to focus on philanthropy and volunteering? Is it climate change? Like there's a very long list of things. And so in our materiality assessment, we surveyed employees as well as investors. We kept it internal for our first one. Companies can do these assessments every 2 to 3 years as things change. And for our next one, we'll probably involve customers as well. But we surveyed these stakeholders on various issues, and then essentially we landed with a matrix showing the priority areas that we should be focusing on. And for us, we have 10. I think that number probably is different for all different companies and industries and sizes and whatnot. But for us, we've got 10 priorities that we focus on. Those are the areas that we're gonna double down on. That doesn't mean that the other topics don't get attention. It's just these 10 that we're focusing on. So once we established that, we were then able to establish an ESG governance committee within GoTo that meets regularly and is managing all of this and reporting all of our efforts back to the executive team and our owners. But it was really that materiality assessment which gave us the foundation then to go report on these 10 areas that we're focusing on. So I think that's a really great exercise for companies.
Love that. Rebecca, now it just came up, but how many areas do companies usually, now I'm curious, what is that in that materiality assessment, which feels like a crucial piece? How many topics usually are like covered?
Yeah. The topics that are material to your business. So what a materiality assessment basically does is it figures out what issues either your company impacts. You have an impact, right? You have training, development of human capital. You have carbon footprint. You have all of these different things. So, and it also has these issues impact on your company. So obviously, you know, we can see right now how much impact climate has on particularly certain sectors. So the number of issues that are material is not necessarily like there isn't a typical number, but I will say people usually end up with 10 to 12 is about right. That said, I will not say that is like a scientific number. That just seems to be the way it works out.
Yeah.
You know, and then in terms of prioritization though, you know, that's part of the work of the strategy is to say, yeah, there's, you know, 3, 4, 5 at most that we're really going to prioritize, because you cannot boil the ocean. You cannot tackle, these are enormous issues. So you really have to say which ones really will make the biggest difference, both in terms of the wake we leave behind us as business, as well as, you know, how well managed our company actually is. So you have to really make some choices. That's what strategy is. So, you know, that's what I would say, but it does seem to be 10 to 12 and then boiling down to 3 to 4. Yeah. And a couple other things just to think about, like getting started in a report that I have found, just because I have done so many of them at this point. Materiality assessment is so critical. You know, I have worked on reports where they have only a very organic materiality assessment. And I will tell you, not only is it harder from a consultant side, it's harder internally, because what happens is you have when it's done well, you have a lot of people involved in your report, because HR knows what their impact is and operations knows what their impact is, and you bring them all together. And what happens if you don't have, you know, a prioritization or a roadmap is everybody thinks, because they're coming from their perspective, that their piece is the most important, and it can get pretty darn clunky. So, you know, I agree with Amy wholeheartedly that understanding your material issues and how you're going to prioritize them is critical. A couple other things is thinking about what are your goals for the report? Like, is it that you really, at the end of the day, need to answer to the expectations of your investors, and that you're chasing capital, and so you need those billions of dollars that are, you know, using ESG requirements as part of their selection process? Do you need to answer to those? Or is it that like really you're chasing talent? You're in a very competitive industry for talent, and this is really going to be more about making employees feel good, making them engaged. Those two things will yield very different reports. So being clear on that as an ESG leader, whether formal or informal, and making sure that everybody is in agreement on what the goal of the report is will help you a lot. And then, you know, the other thing I would say to get started is a current state assessment. What do you know and what data do you have? And that, you know, because you will have your materiality assessment and what is important to you. A current state assessment is a little bit different to say, these are the issues we're going to manage, and this is what we know about how we're managing them today. And assessing that gap helps you understand not just how to put out your first report, but also, you know, it will help you, especially with your leadership, in being comfortable if it's not perfect. And that if you only have a few things, and make, you know, hard decisions on, are you going to talk a lot about this? Are you not going to talk at all about this? Or are you going to talk a little bit about this and create some commitments or goals to disclose more or to perform better in future? Because the gaps will exist. They exist for every company, even the most advanced reporters.
Yep. Okay, so let's say I'm a company and I do my materiality assessment. We now have our priority areas. I'm getting ready to kind of dive into writing a first report, which we know takes a long time, and would love to hear your thoughts on how long these reports take to write. That's one question, I guess. And then what are the sections? Like, what should I be writing in this report? What are those classic sections that we should expect in a report, in an ESG report?
So before I started our project, and so I think I started thinking about it in December of last year. I think we kicked off the process in February. We published our report in July, which I see. So our fiscal year is calendar year, and I see a lot of reports come out in the April timeframe. Ours came out in July. I was kind of happy that it came out in July because there weren't a lot of reports coming out. So I felt like it kind of stood alone and it didn't have a lot of competition for readership. But that aside, I spent countless hours looking at other companies' ESG reports. I mean, I was just looking at all of them, and particularly I was looking in the tech space because that's where I'm at. But I was just, looking at the sections that they have and the design and, the colors and like how they were, put together, really taking notes on what I liked. And I think that's a great way to kind of go about this, is like, go find out like whose reports you really admire and how they're set up. But I think, basic sections, you're going to have a CEO letter, you're going to have an introduction about your company, company size, your industry, maybe your company values. And I think you go into the different sections. So you've got your environmental section, your social section, your governance section, and, the different areas of focus in those. And then it's kind of a wrap up. So I think that certainly more sections, and I'm sure like Rebecca could talk about that as well. But I think taking a look at competitors or other reports would be really helpful. That's what we did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Love it. What about you, Rebecca? What is the timeline you normally see with these?
It can be a bit lengthy. I would say typically we spend about 6 months from the time we, kind of kick off with all the different subject matter experts to the time it's published. And that's a fully designed report, with lots of bells and whistles and this beautiful and all that kind of stuff. So that's about typical, I would say. I think people are trying to make that shorter and shorter, and reporting is evolving significantly. There are things that are shaping that timeline. One, the increasing regulation, makes it so that people do want to report earlier in that April timeframe in kind of alignment with their annual report. Because of that disclosure, I'm seeing more and more disclosure being pulled apart into a very data heavy sheet, and then more of the storytelling around the management approach and the progress in a separate, more narrative. And that to a degree that makes things a little quicker. Not really, but a little bit. And then, in terms of the design, that really depends on how heavy, it's not necessary, but if you want people to read it, you should probably make it attractive and break it up into infographics and little features and make it digestible. This is heavy content. Like, this is not like fluffy, like which hair color should I use? This is heavy stuff. And, and it can be very, depending on your industry, it can be very, very quantitatively heavy. So, the more you can make it digestible, the better. And so time spent on design and information, not just creative design, but information design, and making it digestible for people is a really good thing to do.
Great. So obviously we heard about Amy's amazing 60-page report, and I'm sure a lot of these reports are really lengthy. Rebecca, because you consult in this area across a lot of companies, what would you say could be like what we call in tech, like an MVP or a minimum viable report, so to speak? Like what would that be especially for those starting out that are like, this is really big, we don't have a lot of resources. Yeah. Is there a way to do it where you're starting out, not small, because it's never small in ESG, but smaller?
Yeah. I mean, I think first of all, one thing I will say, despite the fact that reporting is a big part of my business, like not everybody has to do a report. there are a lot of ways to communicate the way that you're engaging with environmental, social, and governance issues. There are infographics, there are, impact reports, which tend to be slightly lighter. There are, web pages, there are brochures. I mean, I could list a zillion different ways that you can communicate. If you decide that you're doing a report, I would say for it to be, credible and have the value that you want it to have, it would need, as Amy said, you need to know what issues you're reporting on, and that those are the issues that your stakeholders expect you to report on, your material issues. I would highly recommend, like I said, I have written reports that they have not really done a deep prioritization. You can do it as your MVP. I wouldn't advise it, but you can do it. I would say you need a disclosure listing, such as an index of the quantitative disclosures. So this is, what is your workforce representation? What is the energy use? What is the water use? Whatever the issues are, the actual data, having that in an index is really important, because if you are looking for capital, particularly from investors, or analysts, if you're a public company or hoping to be a public company, a lot of that data is pulled through great tech companies like Millie. And so you need to make it very, very findable. And a chart will do that with a nice white background, and so that it can be combed through is really important. You have to have credible documented methodologies. If you are going to disclose energy and emissions, or human capital metrics, or coming soon to a U.S. Near you, data and privacy metrics that are regulated, then you need to have a sound methodology behind it. That is absolutely, you can't just say, like, I think I looked at our energy bills, and I used the Google emissions calculator and we're good to go. That's not a great idea. So you need to have credible methodologies behind you, a cohesive narrative. Like, is there a story that's told? And that's it. I mean, a lot of people, I know that goals and metrics are really important. The strategy, an ESG framework, all really important, will give you a better report, but you can work up to them, and most people do.
Awesome. Okay. What are, I guess you mentioned this already, some of the alternatives to these ESG reports? I know you mentioned infographics and impact reports. Amy, anything that you can chime in on that you've seen?
Yeah, I think I've seen like 1 to 2 page, like a digest from like an ESG report. And Rebecca, I don't know what that would be called, but it's almost like an ESG report, super condensed into like 2 pages that you could send to somebody if they don't have time to read all of this. It's kind of like the biggest hits. So that could be something that a company, if they don't want to do such a lengthy report, they could just see, okay, what are we doing? What can we pull together in the interim if you're thinking about doing a report down the line? I think that could be helpful.
Okay, this one is a tough one, and I know things are changing by the minute, but what are the new regulations that folks should note when thinking about ESG reports? I feel like this is a big one, and it's really meaty. So feel free to answer it in whatever way you'd like.
Do you want to go first, or you want me to go first, Amy?
One thing that I just saw, I think it was last week, that I thought was really interesting was that the White House is now going to have select vendors, and I can't remember like the dollar spend threshold, but they're going to have vendors, all government vendors, be required to report to CDP, or Carbon Disclosure Project. And so I thought that was really interesting, because we reported to CDP for the first time this year. And so, we'll include all that information in our next ESG report. But that was just one kind of new requirement coming out that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. For sure. And that's happening around the globe. Really, there's news today about the EU and some sustainability standards coming out. And I feel like the EU has something new to say in this space about every week or so. It feels like, the UK has directives. Canada has come out with things. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, for public and private companies, if you're doing business in Singapore or you're getting capital in Singapore, like, there are requirements around there. So there's a lot. And then, of course, in the news all the time right now is the SEC pending regulation around climate, which is significant. So there are, there's a lot of regulations. And I know that, everybody out there, you might say, like, well, we're not a public company. This has traditionally been the realm of public companies. However, depending on how things shake out, that's changing pretty significantly because, first of all, you are probably in some public companies' supply chains. And supply chain, two things. One is it's not if it's ever going to be regulated for certain issues, it's when. And then the other piece is public companies not only are about disclosure and being transparent, but they're looking to create performance around these issues. They're going to need you to help. Just to put it in perspective, for a typical consumer goods company, 80% of their carbon emissions come from their supply chain. 80%. And there are certainly plenty of industries where that similar 80% of their emissions come from the product use. So you may fall there. I mean, Apple's a great example. It just happened. They have had this carbon neutral across their entire supply chain and product lifestyle by 2030. Their operations are carbon neutral right now. They've achieved that. So they are now requiring any of their manufacturing vendors to have net zero plans. So that's big. I mean, if I had the potential to be in Apple's supply chain, I would very much like to be in Apple's supply chain. And I'm guessing that goes for a lot of us. And the impact of that, like literally 2 weeks later, an announcement came out, 200 of their manufacturing partners have already made commitments to power all of the Apple production with renewable electricity, and it happened like, boom. And I don't think it really happened overnight. That's just the news cycle. But like, that's how fast things are moving. So if ESG data isn't, and reporting it or disclosing it in some way isn't on your radar as a private company, it should be, because it's coming to a report near you.
And even, so we're privately owned. We've got 2 PE firms that own us, and we get asked by our owners all the time, because then they are rolling up, ESG performance across their portfolio to, the powers that be that are investing in them. So we're not public, but I don't feel really much of a difference between being private or being public, and any less, looked after when it comes to this, definitely. And I do feel like climate is definitely the biggest issue when it comes to regulation. At least that's how I feel right now. It just seems like that's, all the governments are, looking to really regulate around that versus other material areas when it comes to ESG.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, I always say it's so important to never lose sight of why. We need to have a sustainable society and a sustainable planet. Like some regulations like the SEC are there because of the financial risk, and that's their remit, is to make sure people understand the financial risk of their investments. Many of these others are really about trying to create progress. Government's trying to ensure that progress is being made towards a more sustainable society.
That's great. So much work that you guys do is like really incredible. It's just, I feel like the nitty gritty of what you do can sometimes feel overwhelming to folks that are new at this. And one of the big things that comes up, I think, are standards which we all know and love, acronyms like GRI and SASB and all those. Can you guys walk through what is that to folks that are new to these? How should they be thinking about these, the differences between them? And yeah.
So I can jump in. It's a real alphabet soup, and I'm not going to bore everybody with all of the different ones that are out there. The big ones are the Global Reporting Initiative, which is kind of broad to environmental, social, and economic impacts. The SASB standards, which used to be part of an organization called SASB, but now is not SASB, even though they're called the SASB standards. It's this crazy thing. CDP, Amy already mentioned. TCFD, which is about climate risk disclosure, went from nobody doing it to a lot of people doing it, because it is about the financial related risk of climate change. And then we should just mention the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is another, it's not standards, it's framework for understanding, the pathways to a sustainable world. So there's a million. I mean, we could go on and on and on. The thing to understand about frameworks is, I know people get really freaked out about them because there's so many of them and they're super technical. I think GRI is like 450 pages long. The thing that I will say about them, if you can pick one, it is really helpful, because not only is it going to help you understand what to disclose. I mean, looking at standards is a really important part of a materiality assessment, but also give you guidance and how to talk about them, how to measure things. Like, it's a free resource out there to help you get to a really good place with your report. So they're good things. They're not bad things. People talk about them. They're the worst things in the world. They're very good things and very helpful things. And I will tell you, as someone that does this all day, every day, the standards are the reason I don't get overwhelmed by the amount of information and the ambiguity and the constant evolving nature of this, is because the standards help me, understand, like, okay, this is, and measure, here's where we are, guys. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. Let's work on it. So they're good things.
How do you choose which to use?
Amy, how did you choose?
Yeah, how did you choose?
So when we were working on our report, I think we were like 85% done. And someone that I really, really trust when it comes to ESG, I was having them look at the report, and they were like, well, are you going to map this to GRI or SASB? And I was like, oh gosh, like, how do you do that? I don't know how you do that. So I'm looking at all these examples I mentioned at the beginning, all these tech examples, and some do and some don't. And I was like, oh, this looks so hard. I was just like, I was kind of daunting. I was scared. I was like, I don't know anything about this. But then when I was working with my consultants and my writer, we started looking at it and we're like, oh, this is actually not as difficult as we thought. So we went with SASB because that was the advice that I was given. And maybe next year we'll do SASB and GRI together, but we chose SASB, and, we went to the SASB site, plug in our industry, information and technology. It spits out like a nice PDF of the exact, kind of framework and things to do. So we just applied that, and it honestly was not super difficult for GoTo. It might be very different for a bigger company or a different industry. And then we also, all of our ESG and corporate responsibility efforts as well align with the United Nations SDGs that Rebecca mentioned as well. So we just chose SASB and went with it, and it worked. And you can take a look at our report and see how that looks at the end in an index. But yeah, that's how we chose it.
Yeah. And I think that's indicative of how people choose them, is like, again, your stakeholders and what you're getting asked for will often guide it. There are, and the regulatory requirements of your industry. Some places you're going to be required to do TCFD or SASB. That said, if you don't have any, there's no requirements, no requests, anything. I always like GRI as a place to start because it's the most comprehensive and the most flexible. So it gives you lots of places to go, and you have more decision making on where you can go. So that's, obviously there's a requirement that you report on your material issues, but it's just more, it's a bit more flexible and a little bit more comprehensive.
Yeah. Very helpful. I feel like these are the nitty gritty questions that feel crazy, but the chat's blowing up because I feel like this is really relevant. Okay. So I know we're kind of like closing in on our regular time. So I want to just get to some of these big ones. How can you leverage ESG reports in different ways? So, right, you spend so much time and energy putting this together. What can you do beyond that with the tool?
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Amy, please.
I was just going to say since ours came out in July, we've been using it in so many different areas. So we obviously had our big announcement, like GoTo's fiscal 21 report is out. Okay. But we've also been using it in different, like other different social posts. So maybe we're talking about one specific material issue on maybe an awareness day or something like that. And then the link is to the report. So we're able to share it, in various ways and kind of splice information and highlight different things at different times. So for us, it's not like one and done out the door. And like, that's the last time we talk about it. We're always talking about the things in the report. So I think that gives, all of that work that you're doing to do it extra legs because you know that you can use everything in there often.
Awesome. Amazing. I love it. What about you, Rebecca? What have you seen with companies leveraging the report beyond the report?
Yeah. So, we talked a lot similarly. It's a great change management tool. It is a point in time, but it does a couple of things. Like super tactically, it has a deadline. So it forces conversations that people don't typically have time for, often either, people are too focused on the day-to-day business. So this forces the conversation. So that's really good. The other thing it does is it forces a change management technique. It forces a team, whether formal or informal, doesn't matter. You are all working together for an objective, which is to tell your story in the best possible way. So that, that forces, again, tough conversations a lot of times that maybe you wouldn't otherwise have without that objective. So that's kind of the tactical side. And then from a larger kind of contextual side is you are looking at things like your operational practices, your human resources practices, and looking at them with an external lens, a different lens than you usually are looking at them. So it forces you into different conversations and to really look at how integrated are these practices and these outcomes in, like we talk, DEI is the easy example. We're doing a lot. We're talking about it a lot. We have really strong intention, but this forces you to look at how are we defining progress and are we making that progress? That is a awesome conversation to have and one that maybe wouldn't happen without putting the metrics, the goals, and the timing on it that a report has. And I see Amy head nodding.
Yeah, no, I'm totally head nodding because so now that we have our first ESG report out, when I'm thinking about doing the one for 2022 to come out next year, I can now show year-over-year progress, which I've never been able to do before. So, thinking about the environment, like, are emissions coming down, what's happening there. So what an opportunity to share with the world our progress.
Yeah. Actually, I want to point out for those that aren't following the chat, Laura asked a great question about are materiality assessments done once and done, or should companies do regular assessments? And Amy, you responded. Do you want to share that for those that end up watching the recording?
Yeah, so I think things are always changing. Think about how much the world changed from like 2019 till now. Like we're living in a different world. So I think, companies can do materiality assessments every couple of years. So we'll do our next one next year, which will be 3 years after our first one. But I know that some companies do them every year too. But I think it depends on, the company and your bandwidth and all of that.
Yeah.
Rebecca, what have you seen as far as?
Yeah. 2 to 3 years is great. It's really good. That would be best practice. That's moved up to Amy's point. The world's moving faster than it was. It used to be 3 to 5 years was the recommendation. Now it's 2 to 3. which seems right. But, and I will say the recommendation is always 2 to 3 years, or if, the world changed around you and the material, again, this is about your material impacts. So if things have changed so drastically that your material impacts have likely changed, then, you need to relook at it, whether it's a full assessment or just a partial assessment. That's a very common thing. We had an earlier question too on, should it be external or internal? I would say, ideally from a credibility standpoint, you want external. That said, companies often start out small. Maybe it's internal, maybe it's just executive interviews and talking to a few of their stakeholders, and then build up to very, very robust. I mean, there is an ideal of a materiality assessment, and it is quantitative and qualitative in nature, and is a very robust perspective input from all of your stakeholders. That said, that is a big undertaking. It is an expensive undertaking. So you don't have to start there. That's something you can grow into over time.
Yeah, love that. Okay, so what are some best practices for doing these reports? And then what are some common mistakes?
Amy's thinking. I will say one best practice that nobody thinks about in reporting is good governance. And I don't mean governance big G and corporate governance. I mean governance of the project. Making sure that you have a plan on how you're going to do this. You've decided what roles and responsibilities are, what accountabilities are, who's an approver, and everybody knows what their part is to play before you get started. I cannot stress how important that is to making it a smoother process. And then the other thing that's very similar to that is a really, really high degree of collaboration. You want to, people need a voice. These subject matter experts have a voice. But also does your legal, who is going to decide ultimately, can you disclose this or not? And your marketing folks and comms folks who are going to say, this is the way that we need to frame that. All of these things, and these are often competing voices. So the governance brings it all together, and the spirit of collaboration makes it so that it's not the most painful thing you'll ever do in your lifetime. So those two things aren't always considered, but they're super, super important to having a good experience.
Yeah, love that. I'm going to ask one more question. While I do, feel free, everybody, to just drop your questions in the questions tab. I already see a bunch coming in, which is great. And then we will go through as many as we can here. So my last question is, how have you seen, and it sounds like, Amy, you guys have done a lot of this. How have you guys seen the ESG reports tell like a brand story? And do you guys have any examples of ways you've leveraged them, tangible ways you've leveraged them to like tell the story beyond just releasing the report?
Amy, do you want to go, or I can jump in? I can give folks an easy example.
Yeah, maybe give an example. I'm going to think about this a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So, I think for a brand story, when it's done really, really well, the material issues come together with the overarching brand narrative and your brand value proposition. So a easy example, because we all like snacks, is Mondelez. So their brand story is around ESG, and their ESG narrative is around snacking done right. So we can get that, right? That goes back to their core value proposition of like taste. We sell really tasty stuff, chocolates and chips and yumminess, but it also, you can see how it ties back to some real issues that they are addressing. Consumer health and well-being, living incomes for cocoa growers, which is a huge issue. Deforestation around cocoa is really important. DEI, and in throughout their supply chain, plastic pollution, because none of that stuff is recyclable. Like, they're addressing these issues, and they're wrapping around this brand story of snacking done right. So I think that's an example of when brand story and ESG, super technical disclosures come together in a really nice way.
So GoTo, if you're not familiar, we make a lot of different software products, but a couple are actually competitors to what we're on right now. But we make GoToWebinar, so a great webinar platform, and then also GoToMeeting for conferencing. So I think, one of the really great parts about the GoTo brand is that we are able to help our customers lower their carbon footprints by being able to do literally what we're doing right now. Like, none of us had to travel to go to an event. We didn't have to get in our cars. We didn't have to emit anything, driving or flying to be at this event today. Like, there's people from Colorado, there's people from all over the country on this, which is really cool. So one thing that we do is we are able to kind of quantify our the impact that our products have, with our customers and avoiding emissions. So we're able to feature that in our report, and certainly that's connecting kind of the dots between like all of our ESG strategy, but then also what we're doing as a company. So
Love that.
I think the more you can connect, what your company is doing as well, whether it's your products or your services and how they're helping out, that's a great thing to do.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you guys so much. We have a ton of questions, so I'm going to just start with some of them, and hopefully we can get to as many as we can. So Stacy asks, what's one or a few of your favorite ESG or social impact reports that you've read? Is there anyone? I feel like Amy might.
I really liked ServiceNow's from last year that came out this year. I liked that one. And I feel like I like reports that are very visual. Like, I'm a visual learner, so I want to read data in infographics and things like that versus like really tight text. Like, I see some reports and they're all one color or two colors, and it's just a lot of paragraphs, and I look at those and I'm like, I just don't want to read those. So when we did our report, we wanted it to be like, colorful and like quotes and things like that. So I tend to go towards reports like that, and I like ServiceNow's.
Awesome. Rebecca, any that stick out to you? Ones you've done or ones that you've read?
I was gonna say, so a client of mine whose report I love, and we just put out they're only their third one, so they're pretty new, but I think they're awesome. And I love their report. It's an impact report, so it's Electronic Arts, the video game company.
Oh yeah,
and
awesome.
So they do a great job. The story is very much their story, like, and who they are, and it's grounded in the context of their industry. And the creative is all their own intellectual property, so it's fun, right? And it's a nice balance of like the fun of their industry with the gravitas of the issues they're tackling. And there's not a lot, like, it's not tons of narrative and copy, but what is in there is really, really specific to their issues. And they are like, they may not be a long-time reporter, but they are, but they're very advanced in terms of what they're disclosing. Like, they're talking about attrition by representation. That's a very advanced disclosure to make, but it's important to them because they know that they said they're committed to increasing underrepresented talent in their business, and they do not back off of saying, here's where we are, here's what we're working on to make change, here's where we're doing well, and here's where we can do better. Like, I think that is the highest standard for an ESG report.
Yeah. That authenticity is, I think, really important in a report.
I love that. Shelby asked that she'd love your thoughts on SASB versus GRI definitions of materiality, shareholder versus a stakeholder focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, and so for people who don't know, this is the difference basically between defining material issues as strictly your impact. GRI, since they've changed, is now saying it's all about your impact on the world, right? SASB is saying it's also about the impact of the world on you, because it has because it's an investor focused framework. So I'd say that's what I would say about those, is going back to what we talked about. What's your intent for the report? What stakeholders are you trying to answer to? That will help you decide what the right definition and the right framework is for you. And I don't mean in terms of GRI, but the right framework of like, how are you looking at impact? Because that's the core issue here. I think at the end of the day, we all probably, this is a personal opinion or a professional opinion, we all need to think about double materiality. We need to think about our business. We're in business. Like, we're not nonprofits here. So we should think about how the world is impacting, and we should talk about that and manage that to have viable, sustainable, ethical businesses. But we also should be mindful of the impact that we're leaving behind us as well. But that's a professional opinion. I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer to that question.
Yeah, love it. So this question actually came through the chat, and I see Laura and Amy having an awesome chat, but I want to bring that in so everyone can listen. Laura asked Amy about, now that you're releasing your second report, kind of what else are you thinking about including? So
I'm thinking about that right now, because certainly, so our material areas of focus aren't going to change. So the report could largely look the same, but just with the same data, right? But then also showing year-over-year progress. So I'm really thinking about that. How do I want to create a new report that is equally as fresh and exciting to read and as visually exciting? Oh, hello there.
Oh, you said there'd be an appearance.
You're never too young to get started in ESG. So
she really wanted to learn about ESG reports, everybody.
Oh my God.
Homesick and wants to get her webinar debut.
But yeah, I'm thinking about all that stuff right now, and I'll probably go and look at how brands in the tech space are telling their story year over year to see what they're changing, because I'm curious, because I don't know exactly how I want to do it. I do know some companies will do themes for their reports, and so every year is a different theme. So we didn't do a theme last year, so I don't know if we'll do one this year, but I'm definitely thinking about that. I'm sure Rebecca has insight into this, though. She's done so many reports.
Sorry, I'm having tech issues. Sorry, guys.
No worries. We can hear you still.
Oh, good. I was having tech issues for the last 2 minutes. So sorry. I think, doing this kind of goes back to the current state assessment versus the materiality, and where the frameworks could come in is you're going to have gaps from your first report to all that you could be talking about. So looking at those gaps year over year, like when you do the current state assessment alongside your materiality assessment and identify those gaps. I mean, best practices with your first report, believe it or not, is not just to think about this first report, but setting a disclosure roadmap to say, this is where we want to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, so that you are enhancing what you're disclosing and how advanced your policies, your management approach is year over year.
Sorry, everybody.
There's nothing to be
sorry
about.
I do see that we're at time, and I'm sorry for the distraction at the end. But just really, really grateful to you both, Rebecca and Amy, for joining us and sharing all of this incredible knowledge and experience that you guys have doing this. And really excited as folks are starting to think about their ESG reports, just having this as a resource. So thank you both so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was really fun. Thanks everyone for the great questions.
Feel better.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you next time.
Yeah. Remember, going back to school is fun.